Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to never miss a video from News Laundry.
This is a News Laundry podcast and you're listening to NL Hafta.
अंग्रेज अपना लगान और न्यूज लॉन्ड्री अपना हफ्ता कभी नहीं छोड़ते. Welcome to another episode of Hafta. We are recording today from a relatively rainy Delhi, 8:30 in the morning as opposed to our usual afternoon recordings. And today is Thursday, the 30th of July. Before I get into the headlines, I would just like to introduce the panel, and after that Manisha can get into the headlines. Mehraj is on leave. He's gone back home to Jammu and Kashmir, the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Joining us in office are Raman Sir and Manisha Pande.
Hello.
Thank you for making it so early. And
welcome.
joining us from Patna, Bihar is Anand. Hi, Anand.
Hello, I am in Mumbai. I am from
Oh, how what are you doing in Mumbai? How do you get from Patna to Mumbai?
by train.
Oh, okay. All good?
Yes.
And joining us from the US is Suraj Yengde. Hi, Suraj.
Hi Abhinandan and hi everybody.
Hi. I'll just give an introduction to you. I have your book lying here on our desk, Caste Matters. But before I read a blurb of that book, Suraj is an award-winning scholar, activist, and an author in the field of caste, race, ethnicity studies, and inter-regional labor migration in the global south. Currently, he's involved in developing a critical theory of Dalit and Black studies. He's the author of the book Caste Matters and the co-editor of the award-winning The Radical in Ambedkar. He's currently a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and an inaugural postdoctoral fellow at the Initiative for Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability at Harvard University. He has been nominated to India's highest literary award, the Sahitya Academy Award, and is the recipient of Dr. Ambedkar Social Justice Award in Canada in 2019 and the Rohit Vemula Scholar Award in 2018. So, welcome, Suraj.
Thank you so much.
So, before Manisha gives us the headlines, just a quick idea of this book. I actually just got it a couple of days back, so I haven't read it yet. But you just want to tell me and our audience specifically what it is that this book kind of takes on or explains or analyzes?
This book tries to make an argument for the necessity to have a dialogue on caste in India, so that if we are able to talk about it, then we can discuss about the next steps of annihilating it. And that's why the intervention comes through a first-person experience and perspective with an academic fervor, plus, of course, to make a case that the issue of caste has to be handled along with Dalits, the privileged caste folks, so we can have a collective struggle because our own caste wars have to be fought in our own private circles, beginning with our family, extended family, and of course the larger caste network. So that is the aim of the book, but it also enhances some of the underappreciated experiences, the sensorial appreciations of the Dalit life, the Dalit humor, the Dalit love, the Dalit experiences of rebutting the wild form of atrocities and everyday oppressions. So it tries to present a composite picture for a 21st century as to how do we deal with caste, if at all. It has to be dealt in a radical fashion to uproot it.
And could you just tell us a bit about yourself other than the kind of resume-ish intro that I gave you? Where did you grow up? Where are you from? Your schooling, your growing up years, your childhood years. Where did you kind of navigate your way before you made it to the Harvard Kennedy School of Public Policy?
I'm born and brought up in Nanded, a city in Marathwada, Maharashtra. And that's where I did my schooling. And then I'm a lawyer. I studied law. And then I went to UK on a government scholarship that is given to the scheduled caste students. I studied Master of Laws in Human Rights, mostly focusing on international public law. And then I worked for the UN in Geneva. Then, of course, came back to England, worked in London, and chose to give up on the global north and decided to go somewhere in Africa. And that's why I chose South Africa. I went to do my PhD in anthropology and history from the University of Wits. That's where Nelson Mandela or the likes of Robert Sobukwe studied the revolutionaries fighting against apartheid. And then after that, I went to the US. So I've been here at Harvard. This is my 6th year now, under various capacities. The latest being, of course, the fellow and postdoc simultaneously at the Kennedy School and the Department of African and African American Studies, where I hold a research associate position.
Right. Thanks. So before we get into the discussions of all that made the news and didn't and should have and shouldn't have, Manisha, what are the headlines? What gave us sleepless nights or entertainment?
So India has a new education policy. This was just announced last evening and it's making headlines today. There are lots of changes. One of the changes is, of course, that the Union Ministry of Human Resources will now be known as the Education Ministry to put the focus back on education. We can discuss this a bit. Saifuddin source, there's a video that went viral with Saifuddin source in his own house being under house arrest. The government, meanwhile, has said that he's not detained and SC has dismissed his wife's plea. The video quite clearly shows that it's almost an illegal detention. I mean, it's not almost, it is sort of an illegal detention. A Delhi professor, Hani Babu, has been arrested in the Bhima Koregaon case over Maoist ideology. His wife called it a joke and a farce. This is a series of arrests that have taken place of professors, activists in this case. NIA, meanwhile, has opposed Sudha Bhardwaj's plea. They're saying that she's getting the best treatment in jail. Bombay High Court has directed Nanavati Hospital to submit report on Varvara Rao's health. It's deteriorating and his family members have been wanting him to get out, especially in view of COVID, but that's not going anywhere right now. 5 Rafale jets landed safely at Ambala Air Force Station. I think this is the only time when a plane landing safely made so much news. Usually plane crashes make news, but this was just wall-to-wall, ridiculous, embarrassing coverage we saw yesterday of these jets landing. There are a lot of reporters stationed in Ambala, though you couldn't record or do anything because there was a security cover. There's going to be the Ram Bhumi Pujan on August 4th by none other than the Prime Minister.
Which is also my birthday, so if any of you want to photo an Ariel on your laptop and send a subscription to News Laundry's way on that day and just say Jai Shri Ram, feel free. Pay to keep news free. I'll appreciate it as a birthday gift.
That's a good one.
Ayodhya administration has put restrictions on television news. I'd really like to see how this plays out. You can't have heated debates. You can't have it among a crowd. You can't attack anyone in this debate, and you can't call people from the other.
Controversial
people with suggestion. It seemed to me that they don't want to call people who opposed the building of the Ram temple, the other party basically.
So if they don't want fights and controversial people, that Arnab and Times Now will not be broadcasting that day?
No. In case Arnab goes there, he has to give a personal undertaking that he will not cause any...
no, but that is if you go there. But this is also true for panels and studios.
Yeah,
this order is not restricted to what you're doing in Ayodhya. It's also extends to studio.
Mayawati has moved the Supreme Court against BSP Congress merger in Rajasthan. The flood situation remains grim in Assam and Bihar. In fact, we have a really detailed report on how Assam, media covered it in Assam. You guys should check it out because it gives a lot of details that Delhi media didn't. The Sushant Singh Rajput case has taken another twist. His father has filed an FIR against Riya Chakravarti in Patna. So news channels now from going after outsiders in Karan Johar and YRF and all are now going after the girlfriend. Delhi government has launched a job portal. There's a sedition case against a political activist in Manipur. This is continuing in the trend. The state has had even journalists being slapped with NIA and being jailed for almost a year. So that kind of continues in Manipur. In the Mumbai Sero survey, 57% respondents in slums were exposed to the coronavirus and 16% in residential societies. Twitter has removed coronavirus misinformation video posted by Trump.
And they also disabled his son's Twitter account for like 12 hours or something. So
what
something
did he do?
that he posted a fake news of I think on hydro whatever chloroquine jo bhi hai. So those are the headlines. Anand can tell us a bit about what's happening in Patna, although now he's in Bombay, but I'm sure he was there till a few days ago. But first, let me, just discuss this caste annihilation and, speaking about it with Suraj. Suraj, I have two specific questions. One is that, in fact, for the longest time, I've been wanting to do this long podcast on this, what they call chamar pop in Punjab. The first album was Akkha Putt Chamaran De, and was very successful. I don't know whether you've seen the videos on YouTube. And then part 2 came, part 3 came, and there is this reclaiming that word, and like the Jat Sikh, Yo-Yo, Honey Singh type of pop. These guys, of course, there are a lot of references to Guru Ravi Das and all. And I mean, even, Kanshi Ram had started off, although it became a powerhouse in UP, it was started in Punjab. And in Maharashtra, you see a lot of academic scholars and activists who talk of caste. I guess that's because of, Dr. Ambedkar's legacy, and an icon always then gives rise to more people who kind of look at him as a hero. But can you explain, or is it just because I see it on YouTube? Is Punjab and Maharashtra two places where you have had this pushback? Is it just my imagination, or are these two states outliers in pushing back against dominant castes, kind of dominating the narrative in pop culture and general society? Or is it as good or bad as anywhere else?
I mean, in addition to these two states, there are a few others that could fit the bill. One, of course, is Karnataka. We have Tamil Nadu, UP, more precisely, and also the Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal. Although Bihar Dalit politics was very strong, but it was mostly Congress-led political space that they had captured. More precisely, Babu Jagjivan Ram almost was pitted, as a contra to Ambedkar. But the other states that I've mentioned also have had a very solid kind of anti-caste base. More
just politically, or even in pop culture?
In the pop culture terms, I think 3 states I would add: Maharashtra, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu. Simply because these states have had a rich legacy of fighting back, dating several centuries, and also the embracing of a Dalit identity, but not through a Brahminical lens, but through a lens of for example, you were not part of Brahmin Dharma, but you were, for example, you're Buddhist, or you were native, or you were Naglok, or you were a Tamilian, who were original inhabitants, a Dravidian identity. And I think that's how it kind of started working. And of course, we know pre Guru Nanak, also the movement was heavily inspirational through because the Dalits in Punjab are close to 30%, and so that's the kind of huge number that kind of works side by side. And that's why I think, and also Punjab in this case is very peculiar, because Punjab, of course, due to the feudal relations, and we saw the catastrophe of a green revolution, especially the decades in the recent years. And what that has done is that has in a way worked almost first is exodus, the exodus of Punjabis, especially the people who were Dalits who left Punjab, and of course they came back with a certain capital to sort of building houses and to sort of emphasizing themselves.
And by left you mean left for overseas and made money?
Yeah. When I say exodus, I mean, so I just use that word intentionally, especially to connote to the the rural violence, but also there was a lot of Dalit consciousness that was existing in that region because of the sheer number, but also the movements that came out from that region were very much head on. They didn't look Jats as higher. That was the difference, because but Jats owned the land, and that's the only symmetry that kind of changed the status. And that's why in Punjab they say Jats are the Brahmins,
right,
because they try to imitate the Brahmin form of oppression upon Dalits. And I think that's why we see Punjab is a very unique kind of case in that way that has really almost subverted the narrative. And we did the same thing. I mean, there was in Canada. I was here in Vancouver, and the Punjabi diaspora. One of the activists had actually counted how many times Jats is used in specific songs. It was so revealing, and the way that Jat is used not just as a Jat pride, but also to make other people feel low. So it's a very, one can be proud and still make everyone feel welcome, but the kind of Jat pride that was coming out of that was very toxic and masculine. And so that's why we see a very curious kind of, history of Punjab. And also one should know that Dalits were one of the earliest migrants who went outside. So when the Punjabis left, so who were Punjabis? Also, Dalits were part of that Punjabi, demography.
Right. So when you say that this conversation around caste, your book Caste Matters is talking about why that's an important conversation. It has to be had in not just from the perspectives that dominate discourse. You think that conversation isn't happening or is happening, but it's noise and not in the way that is constructive or productive?
You mean, could you maybe conversation in the public sphere, like non-Dalit sphere?
Yeah, in the sense that when I'm consuming information through newspapers, through political speeches, through when I see Mayawati talk, that famous victory of hers, I think it was in the early 2000s when she won an absolute majority, she swept the state. And, and primetime debates for a long time dominate caste equations, especially when elections around the corner. One sees conversations around this, but I guess they don't get anywhere. What do you think is wrong with the discourse as far as news is concerned, politically, and even in other ways, through drama, theater, and books such as yours? I mean, news and political leaders aren't the only way this conversation can happen. I'm sure it can happen in other ways. What do you think is wrong with this conversation the way it's happening right now?
I mean, I don't necessarily see it as anything wrong happening. It's just that the microphone is not amplified enough. It needs to, the volume needs to be increased. They have been always speaking. To give that's the same example that we were just discussing right now. Why would, for example, Maharashtra Dalits or Punjabi Dalits or Tamil Nadu, would be so, uptight and loud in their response? Is also because they had their own forms of expressions, the musical forms. It was not just like responding to Jats only. It was always existing, right? And that is the kind of base upon which Dalit politics was developed. And in UP, for example, because that becomes almost like a political haven for a Dalit discourse, especially for the non-Dalit perspective to understand. And Mayawati almost becomes a default Dalit person, that one needs to identify. And I think that's partly correct, but also one has to understand that, Kanchi Ram, for example, had really, given a counter culture to the existing Brahminical culture. And that's why we see, Jhalkari Bai, as opposed to Rani Lakshmi Bai, becomes an icon. Of course, he celebrates Phulan Devi as someone, as I think it's the year 1981 or something around that, as the year of Phulan Devi. He, in his Oppressed Indian, he has her as a cover photo. So there is a lot, especially counterculture wise, that's happening, but also in a culture of what we call the quotidian. Dalit involvement has been central to the functioning of Indian cultural sphere. Had it not been for the Dalit genius, the Dalit creativity, the Dalit genre, it would not have had even, gone anywhere. But it's just that the acknowledgement of that has remained very, very curiously silent. Because, for example, any of your colleague who is a Dalit, or in anywhere it's space in India, if a Dalit claims his, her, or their Dalitness, the other person feels attacked all of a sudden. They feel this is, they say, why would you even mention that? I don't look at as a Dalit. In my NCC, my colonel, my commanding officer wrote to me an email because I had asked for reparations for Dalits, and he said, "Why do you want to bring this caste issue? Why do you want to divide India?" So what that means is my assertion of my ancestors and embracing of my past becomes a problematic understanding of why this doesn't get recognized. Because even though I have stories to tell, I have music to sing, I have comedies to share, I have theater that I've been building an entire performance on, I am not accepted for my Dalitness. I'm accepted for my non-Dalitness. Meaning I can provide Dalit story, but I should not be a Dalit. It's almost like taking away my soul out of me. And we can see comparisons here in America in the early years when the blackface was very popular. They wanted black people, but they wanted blackface, but they didn't want black people. And almost in an analogy, India almost mimics the Western episteme. And I think we should still take a few decades to catch up to what is happening in America right now.
I wanted to actually ask you, Suraj, if you're following the Cisco case. It hasn't really made much news in India. It hasn't been covered as it should be. But I was curious about how it's being reported there. And if the media there is aware, like an NYT or Washington Post, when they're covering the case, is there an awareness of what caste is or what caste discrimination is? And how is the Indian diaspora reacting to it? What are the kind of conversations happening around Cisco, if you know of?
I think in India also, there have been coverage. I don't know about TV coverage, but at least the print media have been, or also non-print media such as yours have been taking keen interest and promote doing interviews and extensive reportage. As regards to NYT or WASHPO, they know about it, but also it's a very American-centric way of looking at the world. And so that kind of gets lost in translation, if you will. But they had two op-eds by two Dalit women who wrote about this issue in a very interesting providing a first-person perspective. As to Manisha, your question, do they know about it? Most certainly they do. They've been very much aware of that. But the interlocutors of South Asia most likely belong to the
upper
dominant
castes.
castes. And so that's where the liberal values that fit the American empire project kind of fits in to understand. So America, the way they look at it, America is the way CIA looks at the world. They look through regions, and it's a very arbitrary formation of a certain region. And so they want to feed that market. So it's kind of difficult, but for example, the Boston-based, the PRI, the Public Radio International, and the Pulitzer Center sponsored a research on caste in America about 2 years ago. Philip Martin, an African-American journalist, actually came to India, came to my hometown, Nanded, spent some time, and he did he along with his colleagues did an extensive report on that. And Isabel Wilkerson, the first African-American woman to win a Pulitzer Prize journalist, she wrote a huge, about 12,000 word New York Times magazine piece on American caste system. I really encourage you all to read, simply because it gives a perspective. She calls race is a skin and caste is a bone of American social hierarchy. And of course, she has come to India. She kind of presents how caste system was American in its, since its antebellum era. And how the likes of Charles Sumner, one of the early abolitionists, had actually identified the malady of American social system as being of that of caste. And there was also a journal publishing here out of Boston, where I'm right now, that was called Caste. Very interestingly, and of course, we have the concepts like Boston Brahmins, which is basically to say an absolute top where you cannot challenge. And so the Boston Brahmin Club is a club where almost you have to be born into that legacy family for you to have access. So it's almost replicating that instance, and then that could also mean because of the colonial experience, because the British Empire also had a as we know, whatever was published in British Empire was circulated within the empire, at least to a certain extent, and that could have been one of the ways. So I think there are conversations that are now coming up, and I think with people like me and many more Dalits who are here, it will get certain space as it should.
Right. Anand, if I could just come to you before we move on to other, things that made the news. When it comes to caste politics and even the popular culture, Bhojpuri cinema, Bhojpuri pop music has always been very popular. I mean, it's like Punjabi music has gone across the world. Maybe from Bihar, Bhojpuri music hasn't gone that far, but it's still big. It's not a small marginal thing. It's pretty mainstream. What has the Dalit experience or the Dalit artistic expression been politically in Bihar, in your understanding, and also through the pop culture avenues that we see that are prospering in Bihar?
No, I don't see very vibrant forms of Dalit expression in popular culture here. But it's in, say, literary forms. Dalit writing is there, Dalit literature is there. As he was mentioning that the Dalit movement since the days of Jagjivan Ram, and then a section of Dalits in Bihar, the Dalit demography is generally seen as Mahadalit and Dalit with this, they have divided subcastes within Dalits into these broad categories. So, and later there are a strong Dalit, a section of Dalit leader, if I may say, under Mr. Pashwan. But in popular culture, Bhojpuri culture, OBC representation is there. Some of the most popular singers and even actors in Bhojpuri cinema are from the OBC. But the Dalit voice in popular culture, particularly, is not there. But one has to see that Bihar is not just Bhojpuri; it's just one of the dialects. There is also Maghi, Maithili, Bajika, and the other dialects. So. In those
So all the music videos and the films we see, which we just categorize Bhojpuri, are those actually in other dialects, or that is actually just Bhojpuri, or have we just put Bhojpuri onto everything? All the songs that we see are there others?
See, Bhojpuri is a dialect which comes from the Bhojpur district in Bihar, and its speakers spawn to some parts of eastern UP also. But it is limited to few districts of Bihar and few districts of UP. And since Jharkhand was 2 decades ago part of Bihar, so it has some a number of speakers there also. But there are large parts of Bihar are Maghi speakers, Maithili speakers, Bajika speakers. So Bihar is not just Bhojpuri. So that's all.
Right. Now, before we just move on to the new education policy, which Raman, so you can tell us a little bit about.
I have a question for Suraj.
Yeah, go ahead.
Suraj, this is Raman.
Hi, Raman.
Hi. So, no, I just want you to, how do you view the political leadership, Dalit political leadership in India? I mean, I have this Kanshiram Dalit leadership, I mean political leadership. So, after Kanshiram, I clearly see that this impact of Mayawati is waning. So do you think that any prominent Dalit political leader emerging in India?
Raman, I think it's a part of evolution of any democracy, especially the post-colonial democracy, that it has always found itself to be adjusted into making a new identity-based politics. and every identity-based politics. India is basically a petri dish of identity-based politics. And I don't say this in the terms of condescendence. I mean to say in a positive sense as to how beautiful such diversities are there with it. But because of the caste-based attitudes, it does just gets ugly. In the Dalit context, also it's the same, right? Because after Mayawati, of course, the BSP will again, because BSP is a very cadre-based party. It has very strong roots. In the recent years, unfortunately, we don't see much of cadreization happening as much as aggressively it was happening with Kanchiram, because Kanchiram also had Bamsef that actually did the heavy lifting on a ground level, and it was basically an organization that was promoting social harmony. So with the alpha character of Mayawati, if you will, there are also other alternatives almost operating in every district in popular, of course, where there is a huge Dalit consciousness. There are very well-known grassroots, articulate, smart, uptight Dalit leaders operating on district level, taluka level, and they provide a leadership. And Dalit leadership basically means is to not only provide a political voice, but also have their grievances addressed or have a say in police cases or the daily dealings with the government officials, because our Indian democracy is a red tape democracy, and I think that's how the leadership kind of works, and that's why the organic forms of looking at this is to literally pay attention to the decentralization of Dalit political future. We can of course have few centers, not one, but if you, for example, go to Tamil Nadu, the VCK party led by Tol Tirumavalavan, and of course there are two MPs, him and Dr. Ravi Kumar. They are their own world, and of course they pay attention to what's happening in the north, but also they have a very strong presence to usher a radical voice into the otherwise Dravidian dominated spaces. So what we see in this sense is there are new voices that are coming, and of course the media, if it highlights few individuals, that doesn't mean that is a wholesome thing, because media manufactures leaders. We know in India, and they are known to manufacture leader, and they manufacture Modi as a leader. So similarly, that is also among in the Dalit community, that is the same situation. But also, the wings are changing, Raman, because there is a lot of distrust in the political system right now. And with the current dispensation, by the time they will go or not, who knows? But they will leave a very cracked, very disturbing form of society where it will probably take, two Ambedkars and two Gandhis to kind of fuse to really bring back again the little bit of, confidence that people had in electoral democracy, at least.
Wow. Okay, that's rather grim. So before I move on to the rest, just quickly, I just can get a quick view. I don't know how fair it is to ask you this, Suraj, but because you are there, and I don't know how much of Chandrasekhar you get to see over there, but he was at least till 3-4 months ago, before COVID, he was often in the headlines.
Actually, before the Delhi riots.
And I, went and interviewed him, and I met him, and honestly, I wasn't impressed. I didn't think he was that serious. But it was just like a 1-hour interaction. What is your view of him? You think he is someone who could actually emerge?
I think, we should give Chandrasekhar some time for him to, get his foot. I mean, it was after, of course, Raman Sekhri, when he did that, a report on him for the Quint, that's when it kind of, people started taking notice of it.
Yeah.
But the work was already going on, right? And so what has happened is, I think, there is a sudden enormous pressure on the Saharanpur guy who has been slapped with draconian laws. And, you really need to be, especially when you don't have any political class who is standing by you. And, there is no muscle of, financial as well as, on a national level. It's almost, and you operate on constant threats, right? And I think that's why I'm sympathetic to Brother Chandrasekhar simply because what he's trying to do is at least, get the local Dalits from across. When I say local, what I mean is the people who are really on ground to get, to at least think about alternative politics that we can do, and people who are frustrated, of course, from Mayawati and the other political factions that exist among Dalits. To kind of think about you can also be, and he has very much taken upon the message of Kanchiram, because Kanchiram is the one who changed the scenario of politics. But I think Chandrasekhar or anybody will have to embrace Kanchiram. You really need to do the caderizing. You really need intellectuals working day in and day night, day in and day out to sort of promote a new cultural understanding of society, because things have changed, and so my faith is with people like Chandrasekhar or other leaders, that they start caderizing in a very old fashioned camp sense, where you talk about your ancestors, you talk about the greatness of them, you talk about the kind of fights they led, you talk about Mata Din Bhangi, who led the 1857 revolution, and it was not a Brahmin, Mangal Pandey, and you kind of bring out the subaltern, basically your ancestors' stories, and I think that will, Abhinandan, frankly, if you will take some time. Right now he's just, I'm sure, inundated with too many requests to respond to situation,
things,
and that's why I'm slightly critical of media, that you should give people more chance, and especially talk not only about reactionary kind of responses. So you see almost every other media channel goes and shoves the mic in his mouth almost to ask him to comment on certain thing,
and he is young, and he is very young. He's almost like 10-15 years younger than I am.
And it's true that whatever I've seen of him, like in Shaheen Bagh, where he was, it was like Michael Jackson had arrived on the scene. People went crazy.
Oh right, he has a huge following.
So he has and I think he seems a little stunned by his own popularity. He seems, to me it seemed like he couldn't believe he's so popular. So maybe it's true that he needs to take time and maybe move away from Delhi politics, because I do think that coming here and doing the anti-CAA stir, to me what worked against him also back then was that he was there before the riots everywhere, at Jama Masjid. And once the riots happened, none of these guys showed up. They just kind of evacuated the scene, and the local residents then sort of were just alone in dealing with whatever they had to deal with. So maybe, like Suraj said, just focus on local politics and getting people around you, categorizing at a very local level before just jumping onto the Delhi scene.
I think one thing is one forgets, because as a reporter when I was young, I've interacted with the Mayawati, or I've spoken to Paswan, especially in my early reporting days, and those guys had very thought through it, confident views about anything that I threw at them. Whereas Chandrasekhar, I could tell, was not sure on a lot of things. He just, I guess it just needs a little time, and he is young, and he hasn't had a mentor like Kanshiram. And whatever said, and Mayawati was a brilliant woman. She still is. When you read, Behenji, that, and to be working as a teacher while doing law in the evening. I guess.
Abhinandan, I think, and also Manisha, the point is, see, you have very rightly pointed out, Abhinandan, see, there is always an infantilizing of a Dalit political leadership. People always want to mock. People don't want to give them the credit for the intelligence, their organizing capacity. Paswan, for example, Ramvilas Paswan, of course, a huge towering leader in the Janta movement, right? But people would say, Paswan kitne jade voton se jeeta hai. They would not say kitna jeeta, so that's that kind of margin. And you're very right. Whenever I interact with these people, they are sharp as, like a razor Swiss knife. They speak, they know what it is. And I think, and then I'm thinking, like, why did I think otherwise about them? And then I go like, oh yeah, some bloody reporter, somebody media, or something has happened that really presented this distorted view. And that's what I'm saying. For example, many of these people are intellectuals.
Right.
If you talk to them about intellectual, issues, you will enjoy the kind of prose they will throw at you. You will enjoy the kind of ideas they will take you to. But what happens is we are just, looking for दलितों पे अत्याचार हुआ तो बहन जी कुछ बोलो, I mean, she's gonna say, but she can also say other things. That luxury is given to वाजपेयी. वाजपेयी जी कविता बताओ, फिर वाजपेयी सुनाएगा अपने एक्सेंट में.
नहीं जी, आजकल तो कपिल सिब्बल से ही पूछ लेते हैं और AR रहमान कंपोज भी कर देता है.
So you know what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is, let's hold the same bar to other dominant caste political sphere, but that doesn't happen. So what I want to do is, for example, जो इनको सवाल पूछ रहे हैं, tell me the one time you went to a Brahmin leader or a Khatri leader or one of the Baniya leader and said, आपको बाकी ब्राह्मणों के बारे में क्या लगता है, और जो ब्राह्मणों की जो परिस्थिति है, ब्राह्मणों के जो सबकास्ट डिविजन है, उनके बारे में क्या लगता है. There is not at all a scope. It's almost like Brahman is a homogeneous whole, which it is not. So what I really expect is, or rather wish is to have the same kind of conversation. देश के बारे में दलित लीडर को भी पूछा नहीं जाता है. देश के इशू वो बीजेपी संभालेगी, कांग्रेस संभालेगी, दोनों भी ब्राह्मण लेड पार्टीज हैं. They will know how to run. तुम्हारा सिर्फ वो तुम्हारे जो 18-19% लोग हैं उनके बारे में, और उनके पास क्या हो रहा है, उनकी औरतों के ऊपर छल हो रहा है, उनकी औरतों को जो मर जाती है तो उनको वो क्रिमेशन ग्राउंड नहीं देते हैं. And this kind of extremely survival kind of frame that applies, it really puts twice burden, right? One is to, first of all, you have to come out of that traumatic experience and try to speak something that really makes a legible sense. And second is then, try to critique a system. And that's where, we often kind of default. And I think that's my hope, is to kind of change that narrative and perception of a Dalit experience.
Well, I hope you do, and good luck to you. Anand, before we move on to the issue on the education policy and its revamp, you have any comments on what we've been discussing so far before we move on to the next subject?
No comments. Just a piece of information that Ramvilas Paswan, before entering politics, he was deputy superintendent of police.
Oh, okay.
So he cleared the state civil services, and he was assigned DSP position. So it's not just that he had no background or educational background, and he earned his spurs in politics, in public life. He had a career before him, and he sacrificed it to join public life.
I see.
It was in 1969, actually, Anand, he in the same year he got into DSP and also got into Vidhan, Sabha. MLA और एक साथ बन गए थे. So many people don't know. Thank you for pointing that out.
So thanks. Now, before Raman sir tells us about the education policy, I had a couple of announcements. By the way, thank you, many of you, after my appeal last week. We have seen a bit of a spurt in subscriptions, so I appreciate that. But even going forward, the next 3 or 4 haftas will be free. They will not be behind the paywall, because we are still integrating our new website, UI UX, with the podcast player. So our subscribers have a completely friction-free and seamless experience. But as long as it's free, I do hope subscriptions don't drop off, because remember, you're not just paying for the hafta. Even the hafta is put together by Snigdha, Aditya, Lipi, Harshula, editors, producers, they work. But you're paying for our reporting, our on-ground reporters who are reporting. So that is what you're really paying for. So don't look at it as just, maine paisa diya, hafta mila. While I'm sure hafta may keep you entertained on the weekends with 1.5 hour conversations with wonderful people like Suraj who do come. But do continue your subscriptions even when hafta is not outside the paywall. Even when hafta is not behind the paywall. What you can do for the duration that it's free for the next 3 or 4 weeks is you can share the hafta with 5 people so that if they like it, they may also want to contribute, because we don't take advertising, because we say when advertisers pay, advertisers are served, we only depend on new subscribers. So do share it with 5 people the hafta, nudge them, request them to subscribe. That's something you can do for as long as it's free. And like I said, there are other projects that you can also contribute to. We have a new NL Sena project. It's called India's Custodial Deaths. As many of you had followed the story of P. Jayaraj and his son J. Benix in Tamil Nadu, who were horribly beaten to death. So as per a recent report, India saw on an average 5 custodial deaths every day in 2019. Why is there such an endemic problem? What's being done to fix it? So we are going to take this up as a new NL Sena project. And those of you who did back the India's Unreal Estate NL Sena project and the Delhi riots, I hope you liked the kind of reporting that is being done with your contributions. The Delhi riots is still not over. So we've got 5 stories out right now. We are going to have...
we've got 3 stories out so far.
One went up yesterday also, right? Okay, including that 3. But so we're going to have, a lot more. It's not done. I mean, for the
and before Sena also, we had one big story on Delhi riots.
So we've got 4 on Delhi riots.
So when it comes to Sena, 3.
Okay.
But otherwise, we had 4.
4. So we will be continuing to pursue this. We aren't just going to abandon it. So do back our journalism, and I do hope you will. Now, sir, there's a new education policy. One is that the cabinet has renamed Human Resource and Development Ministry as Education Ministry.
Yeah.
Other than that, what are the significant changes? Can you tell us? And maybe Anand can weigh in after this. I'm sure he would have read about this.
No, I think it is quite significant because the last education policy we had in 1986. So this one is coming after 34 years. I know it for a fact that they wanted in 2014 itself, they had made it clear that they want to come out with the education policy. And in the past 5-6 years during the BJP government, this is also a fact that RSS was very keen on HRD minister. So HRD ministry. So in fact, it was said in the second inning of Modi that Javadekar lost, his ministership because he wasn't giving the RSS wasn't very happy with it. But after seeing this policy, I must say that RSS, has not been able to do much, in shaping it, accepting the fact that, which is not just RSS. In fact, many educationists also say that, you should be taught in your mother tongue, for the
But that's a bit problematic because let's say I'm in a transferable job and I have a child who's like 6 years old who's studying in, let's say, Maharashtra. And then I'm moved to Gujarat or I'm moved to Punjab. Then the child has to learn Punjabi in class 3 onwards.
No, so what it says is that wherever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond will be home language, mother tongue, local language. So wherever possible is the operative word. I don't think this will impact private schools as much, but definitely I think it relaxes the burden of teachers in school to know English, and to, I'm a little on fence on this because I think one is that I mean, we know that English is an aspirational language and we do want, that's just the reality of how it is that, you do need to learn English for certain jobs or to get ahead in life. What this will do is for private schools, it doesn't really matter because I think that'll just go on the way it does. And in other schools, I think that the younger you start with the language, the more chances are there for you to pick it up. So what will happen is that, especially if you're a first generation learner, like if your parents don't speak English, then your only avenue of learning it is in the school. And if from the school, it's just okay to not, learn it till 6th. And suddenly after 6th, you'll have to sort of be okay with it. You're going to be at a huge loss. Rich kids can afford tutors and you also have I'm a second generation English learner. So my mother and father would speak English and I'll learn at home. But if I don't have the avenue of, if I don't have that at home and I don't even have at school teachers instructing me in English and suddenly after 6th I'm supposed to be knowing
the
English,
distance will become more.
It'll become very difficult.
Other than this, what are the other
I think
policy changes?
They is quite flexible. Say you can have political science and you can have a science subject too now. Yeah. So earlier, it was such a compartmentalization of science.
That's good. Flexibility. That flexibility is great.
Also, they've opened India to foreign universities. Yeah. This is something that the RSS was really against.
Yeah, against.
And a lot of people. This was actually something that was proposed earlier by Kapil Sibal. And there was a lot of opposition because it was believed that the tuition fee would go up and it would and all the talent would also be sucked into the foreign universities. So there'll again be a huge gap. But that's being allowed now. But we don't know the framework of exactly how that'll play out.
They've done away with MPhil also. Something which I was doing, I remember.
Really?
from GNU. So
The dilution of emphasis on boards is great. Like board exams have now just kind of
right.
What in dilution of emphasis? Colleges will still ask you for that result, right? So what is?
I mean, yeah,
what does
well,
it mean?
colleges-
No. See, we need to see how they are going to implement it. But they are going to ensure that anybody who is out of the school will have at least one skill. The skill emphasis wasn't
there earlier. Okay, so that's a new thing.
Times.
An emphasis. Okay.
Haan.
Anand, do you have any views if you've been able to read any details of the new policy?
No, just a few bits of information. Now, the renaming of the ministry as Ministry of Education. So, I would just like to remind that in the 1950s, it was actually called Education Ministry, and till I think 1957, it was called Education Ministry, and Abul Kalam Azad was the first education minister, and the National Education Day, that is I think November 11th, is commemorates the birth anniversary of the first education minister. So this cosmetics of renaming just goes back to the 50s. After that, HRD was just to, I think, widen the scope and give it a more technocratic name, maybe inspired by some. It was a time of very heavy specialization and technocratic jargon in America or American bureaucracies or anyway. So that bit about renaming. Second is, yes, when 86, then education policy under Rajiv Gandhi was there. So if all NCERT books, when you opened it had NEP and the objectives, if I remember, there was a emphasis which no subsequent government or no government prior to it would contest, like critical thinking, scientific reasoning, this, that. So that has all to be retained. But in a changing pedagogical environment, professional environment, employment needs, learning outcomes, and the whole technological revolution in terms of learning and education, something has to be readjusted to it. One of the things they have done in higher education, the proposals, is that they have done away with, they propose to do away with MPhil course. MPhil was seen as unnecessary in many universities. Many universities didn't have it. Some universities, like most of the central universities, did have.
क्यों, क्या पढ़ाते क्या MPhil में? मैं तो BA पास हूँ, तो मुझे कोई आइडिया नहीं है, तो मेरी तरह भी कुछ होंगे. What is MPhil?
नहीं, MA after your post graduation, I went to GNU. I cleared this JRF, and you had to give preliminary exam and then the interview. Then you get registered for MPhil and then PhD.
So MPhil is a stopgap between
MA and PhD, and in MPhil basically you do dissertation.
Okay.
The first you pick up a topic of your choice. Say I took Samuel Huntington, political development and political decay. So I wanted to see how does it apply, in Indian context.
तो मतलब आप डॉक्टर के लायक नहीं, आप कंपाउंडर हो.
हाँ, मतलब कि आप मैंने लुधियाना में I took one district and tried to study the political behavior,
So that's MPhil. Okay, sorry, carry on, Anand. So I just want to get what MPhil is. So go ahead, Anand.
So MPhil is, yes, a kind of bridge course between post-graduation and PhD, and it aims to train you in research methodology. So, however, there was a talk in academic circles that it was unnecessary and people can just go and have full throttle research by enrolling in a PhD program. So That is one in higher education. I am saying I'm not talking here about school education. Second is that they are going for 4 year graduation program. So that is what they have proposed instead of the 3 year. So that is also a long-standing demand from a certain quarters. But what I am concerned about, not only this, but all kind of educational programs, is that there has to be a balance between the newfangled ideas of educating people and learning outcomes, creativity, and critical thinking, and this. That is very good, but you cannot manufacture originality. You can create an environment for its inculcation, but that has not to be at the cost of the critical parts of information. Means the quality of learning outcomes is okay, but there has to be a certain degree of quantity also. Just thinking about some problems, thinking creatively and originally about, but you need to have a history of the ideas or the history of things that have already been done. And that is what is the breadth of information that you need to consume. You need not to consume it by rote. So rote system has to be done away with, but the material that people mug up, that is all not unnecessary. That has not to be done away with. You devise ways in which it can be more productively and more permanently inculcated, but just throwing the baby with the bathwater is not the solution.
But I don't think that the policy is very clearly, talking about critical thinking and this. I mean, maybe this is one interpretation that Anand has, but I don't think.
No, I think that's his prescription. This is what one, I guess, needs. But Suraj, you have.
There is talk about reducing the burden, the curriculum burden. Now, it is important to see what you are reducing. Means there has to be more clarity about it. There is a proposal of reducing burden. What I have seen in newspapers.
So, Suraj, you have gained your scholarship across 4 continents. You've been, to Britain, US, Africa, India, and clearly you probably have the most degrees out of all of us. I don't know whether you have seen any of the recommendations of the Indian Education Ministry, but even if you haven't, what would your prescriptions be? What is right and what is wrong in how we educate our kids? What is the reason that Indians are heading Google and ye and wo and we keep celebrating our engineers, but apne yahan kuch ho nahi raha, kuch which really excites us other than Rafales landing from France?
I mean, see, that's the tragedy of, if one joker performs in a circus, we think that's the only, world that we are gone to, witness. I have, skimmed through because, I am very much concerned about the education system because, as you said rightly, myself educated in 4 continents. I look at India and I look at the poverty of educational distribution because the huge divide between the central board and the state level boards, and then of course we have international boards as well. Now I got educated in state board, then English medium school, but when I went to England, my professor couldn't make a sense of me what I was talking about. So that was the level of kind of gap, the way we use rhetorics to even convey something. Though at the face of it, when I skim through it, some of the highlights are quite welcoming. One of the things they would like to reform, the word they use is quite heavy, pedagogy. And, they would really like to, inculcate the 21st century skills. And also, they would like to make it more creative, more experiential. And of course, as you guys were discussing, to have the mother tongue, as until at least, grade 5, but they are also hoping to, promote it to the grades 8 and beyond. But the Sanskrit that they are trying to have is quite interesting. And unfortunately, the minister who is heading this is a man who still lives in medieval era.
Right.
And a person living in medieval era cannot prescribe a policy that is conducive to 21st century. So I'm sure some people in the ministry or the people they might have hired to use this or rather devise this new policy is actually as the face of it looks pretty radical. One of the things that I like is the universal access, which is something I would also recommend. But in India, what we have to see is for example, my children, Raman children, Manisha's children, or any other person's children, Ambani's children, should have access to same schools, same education, right? We should. I mean, the very necessity of a classroom structure was there to democratize knowledge. It was not to hierarchize knowledge, and that's why the classrooms are structured in a way where you can sit next to each other. And at least the school I went to, we had a rotation. That means it was made that if you are sitting through the whole year, you will meet at least 3-4 new people who will share the bench with you. But unfortunately, that practice, we created all this new slogans. By the way, School Chale Hum is a Sanjay Paswan who actually promoted this when he was the deputy then HRD minister. But the larger scope of this, Abhinandan, is that why should we have disparities? The way we speak English, we speak in a very certain accented English, in a certain cultural English, whereas a person with a regional language who comes and tries to attempt to speak English is almost this colonial hangover that we almost pass out on the person who is attempting to. So that is one of the things. And for me, the whole problem that we have in society could be addressed, and very effectively so, if we radically reform education. But that would take deprivatizing. We cannot afford to privatize our essential services, because that will then make you permanent customer of an exploitative system. Education should not be somewhere I will go and parcha phadke. So many of us have had education at the cost of a lunch, which was basically huge state subsidized. And talking about all the engineers and all who clamor against reservation and all of that, they themselves were heavily subsidized when they went to IITs, IIMs, and all the other institutes of regional institutes of engineering. So in addition to this universal education, which we need, I also think we need a strong emphasis on English language. The reason I say that is 21st century is not going to be a Sanskrit language or a language of a Vedic science. This is all outdated. You cannot create, at least in near future, algorithms based on Sanskrit models. Now you can write a imaginative story as to how algorithms were developed in Vedic era, which is another piece of had a kind of wriggling moment. But at least what we need is this multilingual approach, but English with an emphasis on English. बच्चों को अंग्रेजी पढ़ाओ, उसके साथ-साथ if they're willing, what I mean is, like, let's have the balance of both languages. And if you ask me, in many countries, for example, Switzerland, the children are taught to, if I'm not mistaken, 3 languages. One is, of course, the French or German, and then English, and there is another third language, either of the German or something like that. So, the beauty of us is we can do that, right? And we have like states that could actually promote such kind of, linguistic diversity as we continue to do. So I think that's my kind of a short take on this NEPA. But I really, in a very brief moment of looking at how it has been designed to make it more equitable, make it more sustainable. They want to create scholarship for students from disadvantaged group. And what I like, they want to have National Research Foundation. This is fascinating. I don't know why of course, we had UGC and other, for example, especially South social sciences, and Raman might know, especially when you talk about JRF and all, where we had a social science research council in almost every zone, which did the exact work. But the emphasis on research and basically making a 4-year bachelor degree is for you to then be prepared to go to abroad, or at least be part of a mainstream Americanized education, which values 4-year education as opposed to the British type 3-year education.
So, two things I wanted to just kind of, on this whole English thing. One, at the risk of sounding like an AAP spokesperson, I think the only state that really was emphasizing that everyone should be taught English was the Delhi chief minister, who was said it's important, it's aspirational, that's what actually makes social mobility happen. And at the huge political risk, because I'm sure there'd be some lobby that say, "Acha, ye Angrez hai, ya Bhojpuri nahi sikha raha, Hindi nahi sikha raha." But when it comes to the dominance of English, at least in my professional life, I've seen it wane, and I saw it wane in a very dramatic and apparent way.
Saw it wane or win?
Wane, the English dominance. When I joined India Today Group as a reporter at Newstrack in 95, I think the beginning of 1995. And Newstrack was like by far the most important news magazine in India. Whether English or Hindi didn't matter. Newstrack could make governments go. Like, VP Singh's famous Jhagda with Madhu and the Babri story that Newstrack did in 92. And then Aaj Tak started in 95. And I remember, it's a little embarrassing, but we all were like that. I guess we all came from a culture like that ये क्या रिपोर्टिंग करेंगे सारे आज तक वाले, because इंग्लिश तो न्यूज़ वाले, मतलब न्यूज़ तो इंग्लिश वाले ही सीखते हैं, हिंदी वाले थोड़ी ना सीखते देखते न्यूज़, वो तो गोविंदा देखते हैं. I remember this discussion happening in the newsroom. Really? We'll start a Hindi news bulletin? Don't these people just want to watch Govinda and stuff? And within a year of my time there, of course, now they've become Deepak Chaurasias and they've completely gone to the loony zone. From being the underdogs, the newsroom, we English speakers were the chudiyas. Aaj Tak became the biggest thing there is. So I'm not sure whether that knowing English is important, at least in my field, for success. So is that true across other fields, other than maybe where digital technology is required? Or are we emphasizing the importance of knowing English?
No, I think psychologically it is very, very important to, know English, because I have seen many Hindi journalists who are bilingual. They are doing better.
Exactly. And that's something that a lot of Hindi journalists have pointed out, that even the Hindi journalists who are doing well, and Anjana Kashyap speaks really good English. She's a Hindi star, but she's a very good English speaker. The guys who are purely Hindi speakers are not given the kind of heft in newsrooms, apart from, say, maybe like a Ravish. But how many Ravishes are there? This is one person and it's so much more to Ravish than anyone else. But most news anchors who do well or who rise to editorial positions are also good English speakers.
Okay, Anand, Suraj, you guys want to weigh in on that? Am I just extrapolating a very small experience in a small environment, in a small industry onto the world?
I look through the perspective of my own life, and had there not been English, Abhinandan, I would have been, limited in my scope. उपन्यास पढ़ना है अपने भाषा में पढ़ो, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं, but also, जो तुम्हारा उपन्यास है वो भी तो, it has to also have a global touch to it. So usually what has happened is with the regional, your own mother tongue kind of dominance, which is very important. I am totally in support of, having that scope. But for example, as a Dalit, looking at this issue, it's already localized. My experience is very much localized and confined to a very certain geography. Angrezi padunga, so at least I will have a certain step in to not only challenge the local dominance, क्योंकि जब अंग्रेजी में जब मैं गांव में जाके बोलता हूँ तो वहां पे जो दबंग है वो भी थोड़ा सा ये करता है कि यार ये थोड़ा अंग्रेजी में बोल रहा है. But if I speak in a same rhetorical tone and all, they will not value me simply because they are not valuing me for my talent, my merit, my intelligence. They are more looking at my caste.
Social
Chamar ka
mobility is
bachcha.
still language dependent, is what you're saying.
So what I mean is, I want Dalits also to get a global access to global knowledge. Knowledge is global, and unfortunately, Abhinandan, you and I all know, it is English that is ruling. Now that is the fact. Or why then we should limit NYT news to only certain section of India's population? Why not anybody open and Of course, I mean, what I'm saying is, I don't want to say only NYT read, but the message is that the global consumption should happen in the languages that it is coming firsthand, so it doesn't get very much corrupted in translation and also interpretation.
Anand, your view, you are, like you've often said on Hafta, you learnt English very late in life. You grew up in Bihar in a Hindi medium school. Do you think it changes professional prospects and social mobility?
No, my failures, you can be certain that it doesn't change much. So, but I am going back to something else that you said, and I will come to a different point then. I don't know why people thought that the Hindi speaking states or the Hindi heartland people or people who just know Hindi were not going to watch news. Means the data means it was a period you were talking about mid 90s, and Robin Jeffries' very seminal study and from 1977 to 99 says that India's newspaper revolution was spearheaded by the regional press, and Hindi playing a major part. An interesting data is also that by early 90s, and it is very specific to Bihar, the number of newspaper readers in Bihar, and that is undivided Bihar that included Jharkhand, was more than even populous states like UP and Madhya Pradesh. So, and two very authentic, well-researched academic studies have established this. Now, the demography of news consumption, newspaper consumption, is a bit more complex than the language divide. It has to do with other factors also. I think some more serious study is needed. Now, second is that what Suraj was saying, that has been one of, there is an interesting difference between the approach of some OBC leaders or the socialist leaders like Ram Manohar Lohia looked at English, and his protege like Karpuri Thakur and Mulayam Singh Yadav looked at English and even technology. They thought it as very antithetical to the idea of indigenous development, and Mulayam Singh, Samajwadi Party, had a very hostile attitude towards English till 2012. But like Chandrabhan Prasad, Dalit writer or what thinker you can say, but he has gone to another rhetorical extreme of having a Macaulay Bhavan and worshipping English as a deity. Because his point is that the sharp suits of Dr. Ambedkar were not just a sartorial statement, but a political statement of a kind of liberating force, and to the access to education, to ideas. And similarly, English was seen as a tool. So the Dalit leadership, a section of Dalit leadership and a section of OBC leadership had very different takes on English. Third is there is still an idea of social distance that English has. So and that is more to do with the Hindi speakers. Like people who take a lot of pride in their regional language, like say Bengalis or say Malayalam speaking people, they don't create social distance once they acquire the tool of proficiency in English language. But same is not true for Hindi speaking people. Once they acquire the tool of proficiency in English, they think as they are a different breed now, and they will look for opportunities to strike a conversation in English. And that I have analyzed this, why this has happened, but that would be a very long discussion.
And maybe you should write a piece on that. We'd love to get a piece on that. Although I will say, I remember back the time I'm talking about, I don't know what the status of it is now, but the newspaper that was boasted about having the largest circulation was a Punjabi paper called Ajit, which was bigger than any other Hindi, English or any other paper. But I don't know what the status is now. Before we move on to Kashmir, Suraj, you want to weigh in on any of the things we've said on this whole language divide and the importance of it?
Thank you for asking. I just wanted to have a quick comment. I think it was Chandrabhan Prasad, the English goddess, and he had also created almost equivalent to the Statue of Liberty, sort of demonstrating with a pen in the hand. And I think that was the kind of a very significant. And personally, when it was shown on NDTV, it was very motivating, especially seeing the young girls, communicating in their English, attempting and in a broken English, but they were speaking, and that really created an adoration and admiration to their efforts. And we felt, "Arey, Angrezi mein baat bhi hum bhi kar sakte hain." Because you see, English has always ruled us, either by the white people or the local white people, meaning the native rulers. They used it for the advance. And आज बताओ, आपको बच्चों को स्कूल में डालना है, तो सरकारी स्कूल में कोई डालता है क्या? And when I say सरकारी, what I mean is like regional school. Everybody, the proliferation of private schools in up to small talukas. I was so surprised in some regions of Vidarbha, the Christian missionary schools and other the institutes, the private landowning caste. Everybody is having English medium school. So we can have a regional affiliation and so much of an affection. We should definitely, but nobody will take a chance of this has happened when a friend of mine, or rather acquaintance, who was a Navnirman Sena, Maharashtra Raj Thakre's party, and that I'm talking about 10, 12 years ago. He was a very fiery activist and all. When his children came of the age of going to school, he was hustling to get these kids into one of the private schools.
Right.
And that was English. I was like, where the heck is your pride? And then he didn't answer. So what I'm saying is, see, Ambedkar, had he been a regional language speaker, he would not have been Ambedkar.
Right. I think that's true. That's very true. So I just want to quickly give 10 to 12 minutes each to Kashmir and to the Rafale landing, which Manisha can tell us how it was covered. But I have a few mails. Thank you, readers. You've written a lot of mails this time, and the mails are going up. So I would request you to reduce the word count. I will not give his name because he wants to be anonymous, but you've sent a 1,007 word mail. So I definitely can't read that. So I will include as many as I can. This mail is from Ayush. Ayush says, you guys are doing a great job all round. I was wrong on nuisance, which I felt will lose relevance, but the news discourse has degenerated to a level that it is necessary for nuisance. Sympathies with the team for having to suffer it.
Thank you.
Among other things, Ayush has also written that he's writing to us because of the absence of a comprehensive discussion on Varvara Rao and the Bhima Koregaon case and its handling. It's appalling how the agencies in the country are treating and using taxpayer money to fabricate cases against activists. The discussion has been muted. This is the same investigative agency that let terrorists go who are now representatives of people. It breaks my heart across the country where people like Dr. Kafil Khan are persecuted, and it seems that we are on our way to becoming Putin's Russia. So I think we have something coming up on this.
Yeah, we're going to have a series of interviews around Bhima Koregaon and a few reports also.
So Ayush, we will be doing some stuff, but I can't promise whether Legacy Media will. Now, you know who you are. AU, those are your initials. You want to remain anonymous. You've written a very long mail. You have been rather offended by Mehraj's comment before he went on leave last hafta when Manisha said, can I come with you to Kashmir? And he said, no Indians allowed. So you have put the sequence of events that led to the accession and why the Kashmir conversation is very one-sided. It's good versus evil, which is the innocent Kashmiri versus the evil army. And it's a lot more complex than that, is the point you've made over 1,007 words. You have linked several articles. So thank you for that. I will forward this to Mehraj, and when he's back, he'll read it. And you have closed by saying, Mehraj needs to liven up. He's too depressing. So we shall communicate your offense at his comment, and I'm sure he will address it when he returns. Sonali says, in the past couple of haftas, there have been conversations about acceptable reasons for taking leave. I have nothing to contribute on the main issue, which was mental health, etc. But I love it when people indulge in virtual signaling while behaving like zamindars in the worst sense of the word. Zamindars at least own the capital, however ill-gotten. Supervisors in an organization are just employees who get a few rupees more. Leave is a legal entitlement for an individual when selling one's time under an employment contract. So whether the person takes leave because they were disturbed by Sushant Singh's death, or to go to a jazz concert, or makhiyan marni hai, or child father mother is ill, बहन जी भैया काम है तो बताओ, या leave balance नहीं है तो बताओ. Why is there moral policing on my vacation time? Wage slavery is truly a thing.
That's a very good point, actually. And none of us came up with
I completely disagree. I think it's a terrible point.
I think it's a great point, because it's true that if there is leave if I have leave, if I have 20 days of leave and I take one leave for whatever the hell I want to, it's my right to take it.
So the problem I have with any conversation coming down to right is that there is no debate there. No one is saying you can't. You are judging why you did. So this is the same problem I have. Like, Sonali, I get the point you're trying to make, but I don't agree with the argument you're making. It's like saying, I say something truly sexist or racist or casteist, and someone says, how dare you, that's a horrible thing to say. I say, that's my right. Of course it's fucking your right, but how sensible is it? So the conversation isn't about what's your right, because if you say it's my right, then there is no debate on 80% of the things that we talk about. Because most things, whether they are good, bad, stupid, ugly, are my right to do. Digging my nose is my right. But maybe I shouldn't shake hands after doing that, So I think A, it is very reductive to saying it's a right. B, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. One is, if you've seen the documentary The Last Dance, where Michael Jordan was running a fever, 100 degrees, 101 degrees. He had to play game 5 of that NBA final, and he fucking played it and won. Scottie Pippen had a shoulder injury and he didn't play. He wanted to prove a point. Michael Jordan is judged for that. No one would have said, if Jordan didn't want to play, how dare you not play? Of course it's his right to not play. But he did. Like, for example, when I have shot with many people while I used to direct shows, sometimes you wake up, you have permission only to shoot that day, and the anchor is not well or whatever, but the anchor says, you know what, let me just do this. I will want to work with that anchor again. One will say, it's my right to get one day off, I don't want to work today. Of course it's your right, but you will not be treated the same. So I don't see how that's like, I mean, it's not a compelling argument at all. It doesn't negate the point I was making. I wasn't making the point that you can't give leave, but tomorrow if at election, let's say there's Bihar election happening, and 5 reporters say, Lok Sabha election. Of course, take your leave, but dude, you will be judged. I will want people who know their commitment to their work.
So we are back to lying for leave. Just don't say that you're taking it for mental health. Just say that you're unwell.
No, it's not this.
And then it's fine.
No, on the mental health issue, there's another email admonishing me, and I agree with that email. I mean, I think that's made a very good point. But I don't agree with this. Just because it's a right, you will not be judged for it. I don't think that's
no, yeah, in our profession, there are certain goals. You are working on a story, and in the middle of it, you go on leave because it is your right. Yes,
Raman sir is talking from pained experience.
So much pain. I just don't know what to say.
Sonali, the mail she's referring to was a subscriber who was not in the news industry. They were in another industry, but nevertheless, I think logic stands. Then there's this other mail. This is from Swati. Apologies for writing another nitpicky mail for the second week in a row on the same subject. In episode 286, Abhinandan compared a working professional's request for a mental health day off with a child's excuse to skip school. He seems convinced that such requests are motivated by mischief, a lack of discipline, or a weakness of resolve. This is disappointing. I don't see why it is so alarming if a teacher reaches out for clarification about a student's religious practice, particularly if the student is from a minority community. Before painting something you disapprove of with a broad brush of over-wokeness, it might be worth considering the context in which this practice has emerged. a failure to honor the cultural resources of minority students, potentially alienate these children, impede their academic achievement, well-being, and prospects of school completion. Urban public schools in the US have historically been very hostile towards Black, Latinx, I'm not familiar with that word, but I guess it is about ethnicity, and Asian children. There are a number of studies that describe how schools force compliance with white ways of being and doing. Researchers and practitioners have spent decades pushing for schools to become more culturally responsive. Does this more liberal approach place higher demands on teachers? Yes. And I am sympathetic to this. Might some teachers be overreacting? Possibly. Can precocious kids take advantage of this? For sure. However, there is no evidence that suggests a systemic pattern of overcorrection and mischief. I haven't seen any signs of this in my first-hand exposure to schools in the US, and I do my research and education in university in US.
Great. Yeah.
So, Swati,
Very valid
point well made. I can't disagree with that, but it doesn't change my mind about overwokeness. Just to tell Suraj, and we are fortunate he's here because he does study there. Suraj, last hafta, we had a discussion on safetyism and overwokeness, and I was kind of critical of like having to walk on eggshells about every utterance. And I think it's in the context of the New York Times editor having to leave, and she was complaining that people don't like me and that's so mean of them. I was like, you don't have to like someone if you don't like what they're saying. And one doesn't have to walk on eggshells everywhere. And the example I gave is I have a family member who's in New York, and her 10-year-old son who went to school and said, I can't come on Friday because of course he wanted to do some lafantarbazi because we have to, marriage and demands I sit in whatever the park, wo jahan Hudson River hoti hai, something he payload. It was the most ridiculous religious practice he invented. And the teacher didn't say anything, but she called up, my family member and said that, is this true? And of course she said, no, it's not. Now I was saying that in the schools that we are used to, the teacher would have said, chup karke baitho, ye tum kisi aur ko dena kahani. And I gave this an example of wokeness going too far, where a teacher is even afraid to tell the student to keep quiet. So that's what this is a response to. You have many experiences and, across the world. And what is your view on this whole, am I being too insensitive, too privileged a lens?
Abhinandan, this is, so the conversation that we are having in this time, if you had this conversation, let's say 5 years ago, hold up, 2 years ago, especially pre-Me Too movement era, at least it would not have, rung so many bells. But now the politics has really changed in the way we interpret every other sign, every other conscience. And due to that, what has happened is you say anything, it's almost like the George Bush's statement post 9/11. If you are not with us, then you are against us. So there is no like a middle path that one can say, because it applies to every other conversation we have in our society. And I, for the one out of my experience, of course, is not a huge supporter of binary politics. Not at all, convinced of the merit of collective, understanding and collective hearing process. Because what happens is that the second stage of what you just spoke of, overwokeness, is almost a laughable term, is cancel culture. Because if you don't listen, and then all of a sudden you pass a comment, and so in fact, as we speak today in the Congress, when a Republican member who was a conservative raised this issue of an editor and they had a meeting of Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Pichai, and somebody else, I think. Yeah, so the four top-notch people in the field were there, and so they were asking about how do you censor, because this editor was not even, she was center of left, is what that Congress man raised this point.
Right.
And so what happens is it's clearly, and simply because politics is changing, right? Because now the marginalized subjects are actually articulating their voices. And so going back to the Latinx is basically an identity of the Latin American community, and the X is there to degenderize the aspect, and so that's why the Latinx
I
becomes, because then again this was brought out again by the lesbian, gay, trans movement, as well as the gender justice movement folks who then inserted there. So what we have is, at one point there was one Latinas, but then again that was
Right, it was gendered. Chalo.
they were gendered, so they added Latinx. But again, what I recently saw, especially, and again, social media knowledge is highly. I mean, I'm the old school guy who will book mein nahi chapa hai na, reference nahi na, so I will take my time to come to terms with it.
Right.
So I know, but again, on Twitter I saw so there is a new term called Womenex, WOEM
Okay.
XN, if I'm not mistaken the spelling, and so the whole politics of that is to be sensitive to the other genders, fluid identities. But then a trans account on Twitter said that this is also against trans. So then where do we then make ourselves more digestive and more compassionate to other people's experiences, and we can develop collectively on that. And for that I will need to take Abhinandan in confidence if I want him to believe in certain things. I can't just be going around and saying, what, that was a sour taste. And, but what I'm saying is calling out culture is good, but also calling out and putting down is
a
something
different thing.
I suffer a lot on, my own Twitter and, social media experiences. People even, at the length of the gentleman or gentlewoman, whoever, the person who wrote that 1,700, almost of a similar length, people kind of send their grievances about what they feel wrong. And I think, in my excitement, Abhinandan, because I'm also a responsible person for, in my own, as all of us are, I cannot just promote a rabbi thinking of, with us or without us. It could be,
Yeah, but
you're not with us right now, but hopefully let's work together so that we can be on the same page.
So clearly you're not typical of of commentators or speakers or thinkers or analysts in today's day and age, but thanks. I have another mail. Now, Pruthul has made the point. Again, he thought what I said last week was not quite, he doesn't agree with it. And Pruthul has written a not very long mail, but I'll read the key parts. His point is that when I said that the person who wanted to take a day off because they were disturbed by a celebrity's death who they didn't know, he says when NL team does a chat room session where technically they are only seeing their own colleagues on camera and screen, but there are other subscribers in the shadows looking at you, listening to you, asking you questions and getting the questions answered. It kind of creates a sense of importance amongst us. I can't speak for everyone, but last weekend was my first NL chat room session. And when Mr. Meghraj, I think you mean Megnath, addressed my question, even though none of the team of subscribers could see or know me, I felt good about it. And on social media, everyone like Ms. Bhaskar, sometimes they respond to people. And he goes on to say, when this celebrity dies an unnatural death, who you've interacted with or have known or watched the interviews at length, like Mr. Irfan Khan or Mr. Rajput, it simply shakes our world. I myself was very shaken by Mr. Khan's death. I had just watched his movie Maqbool a night before, and I wake up to the news of his untimely demise. I couldn't get anything done that day. He didn't even know I existed. I didn't know him any better than his movies. But when you see an actor in their deep personal being, like being in their pajamas in their bedroom talking to you about anything, you feel you are listening to your friend. And when your friend passes away, it affects you no matter what. And that is why it cannot be compared to the same thing as seeing someone run over at Connaught Place. Not saying that your experience was less traumatic, but that's not the same thing. And that is why the whole culture of safetyism and cancel culture is so deeply rooted in today's day and age and so personal to each individual and cannot be snickered or ridiculed at. Pruthul, thank you. Well-made point taken, I guess. I tend to see the world as I am, which is not true. Insensitive. So yeah, I guess I can't argue with that. I have been accused.
But that's a good point. All really valid points.
Yeah, valid point. I guess. By the way, in case you Mufat Khors who are listening to this Hafta for free are wondering what is an NL chat room, once or twice a month, depending on how busy we are, we come on to a Zoom call, and that link is sent to all subscribers, and you can actually ask us questions which we answer live. It's an exercise in transparency and accountability, that if you think what we're doing is good, bad, ugly, right, wrong.
And I
so
just
you can
want to
point it.
add to these mails that it's nice that none of them cancelled you or me for our views on the leave, and instead wrote these mails that have made
Explaining
us think.
I agree.
And I mean, I'm definitely more evolved now. Just listening to these point of views make you think about your own position, and that's great.
I
So
learn
thank
more
you
from our subscribers than they learn from us.
Yeah, thank you for writing to us and not cancelling
In
us.
fact, my views on gender have changed across episodes of Awful and Awesome, because the first time when I was like even further conservative than Rowling's view on binary identity, because that's the world I grew up in. I went to an all-boys boarding school, and it's so deeply, that this is what a guy thing is, this is what a girl thing is. It takes you a while, and wonderful subscribers who just don't say, "Abhi chutiye, hat nikal gandu." They actually explain the full thing to you, so they can I can learn. And I learn something new with every mail. Sudarshana, I've read your mail. You said I don't have to read it out. You've spoken about COVID and how we can have a more informed discussion on COVID. Point taken, we shall for sure. Thank you for your mail. And I have 2 or 3 more which I can come to later. But first, let's come to Kashmir. Let's start off with just, Manisha, you can just tell us the Supreme Court on Saifuddin Soz, and then we can just get the panel's view on it.
Hi, this is Lipi Vats, the producer of NL Hafta. This podcast was recorded on a Thursday. On Friday morning, the detention of Saifuddin Soz made front page news on Indian Express and the Times of India, among other newspapers.
Saifuddin Soz's wife went to the Supreme Court saying that my husband is illegally detained. And it's been it's been almost a year now?
It's going to be a year on August 5th.
So he has been illegally detained. The central government said, no, of course, we haven't detained him. He's free to go where he wants. Supreme Court says, very good, tum to kabhi jhoot bolte hi nahi. So the wife's please dismissed. Yesterday, NDTV's cameras went to his house. The cops didn't let them in. They didn't let Mr. Soz out. And he's shouting from inside, ye dikhao Supreme Court ko ki I cannot move. So that is now this should, in my view, have been the prime debate across channels. It should have been front page news in papers today. And all the wonderful papers that we keep talking about, Express and all notwithstanding, none of them had this as front page news. That the center has outright lied to the Supreme Court. A lie that is demonstrably a lie. There's video evidence of it. Yet, fuck that. This is where we are. So that's the context of this. So, a short conversation on Kashmir. Suraj, if you could weigh in first, and then we'll come to Anand. What do you make of the Supreme Court's role in India, especially in the country you're in right now? How institutions are pushing back at each other, trying to keep some sort of a balance going with, Portland, the jo bhi kehte hain, wo jo nameless Fauji aaye hain. And in the Portland, I think the mayor or someone is going to court against Trump deploying these federal forces, and other states. New York apparently is also, seeing these people. Here, do you see institutions pushing back to maintain a balance?
I mean, I like the term nameless Fauji. It's a very that's basically what it is. And I think the judicial accountability is a very cardinal to American democratic experience. Almost every other Western democracy, even in Switzerland, I was told as to how much of the judge remains accountable. And here also, the democracy is practiced where the political class votes for the Supreme Court, and that's why they try to balance out how successful it is. That's a conversation on the day. But if it's Brett Kavanaugh or Ruth Ginsburg or other people of various political leanings, they have a very open sort of. This is my political ideology, or that's how I look at justice. And sometimes look at conservative justice or looking to a liberal justice. It has its own limitations, but also it has its ways of looking at it. It might be wrong or right is something that we need to really look through the perspective of how an individual experiences that. And so compared to India, the judicial system is beyond God, meaning you can't even, have a non-trust vote on judiciary. We cannot rebel or challenge the judicial. We challenge, of course, the judicial decisions, but the constitution of a judiciary with the judges is never part of how we interpret this. People, of course, when the Supreme Court gives a decision and government doesn't like, they change the law, bring a bill and stuff like that. But here's a particular thing. There is a diversity that's very central to how U.S. court system works. And, we know U.S. is one of the oldest continuing judicial system. They had, of course, changes, but their case laws and interpretations have really gave new, laws of, for civil rights and other forms of segregation. Judiciary has played a very important political role. In India, too, that happens. Mandal Commission and various other important cases, Shah Bano and others. In this case, what happens, Abhinandan, if you look at the Supreme Court judges and High Court judges and look at the caste metrics as to how what caste person is represented and what gender, again, of that is represented, and then look at the kind of judgments they give. Because, even when Justice Verma was there, as much as problematic he was, he himself gave in one of the speeches, said, the influences of judges' background that kind of, constitutes in the way.
Right.
And this has been the question of jurisprudence. What I'm saying is, अगर कोई आदिवासी का केस है तुम्हारे पास, फॉर एग्जांपल फॉरेस्ट राइट पे या एक्सपीरियंस पे, वहां पर अगर a person who doesn't even know what A stands for Adivasi, because Adivasi is experience. You need to really have an experience of the local laws, customs, traditions. Sometimes it might contradict with the Indian, Indian constitutional value. Doesn't mean that person is, criminal and all, but the people who decide the future and fate of these communities are the people who don't belong to their background. Similarly, with the Dalit experience or OBC experience, the people are not represented there, and there is a huge, what we call nepotism. In India, nepotism is a euphemism for casteism. It's a caste network that operates in functioning of nepotism. And one should look. Outlook had actually produced a reportage about 2-3 years of extensive, and then they found out, they literally went on finding out the relations. And so, the Mishra, the one that was before, his grandfather was also Chief Justice. Similarly, with now, of course, Chandrachud is a liberal of all of them. He wrote actually a thesis on affirmative action and reservation, 1986 here at Harvard for his JD. But then his father was also a Supreme Court judge. Then, of course, we have the relatives of chief justices or governors, chief ministers, governors, and so forth. So there is a very clear network, and they don't have a public scrutiny. And, the lawmakers, especially the Hindi belt lawmakers, and of course, Dalit lawmakers, most of them have been arguing that we really need to change the way court functions, boss. Because first of all, you have your own collegial system. Collegial system is basically, you go for Viva and in your college, and तुम्हारे टीचर को तुम पसंद आया तो अच्छे मार्क, तुमने उसके साथ कुछ मस्करी की रहेगी तो
there is no oversight. Correct.
So so there is no trust, right? The public needs to trust the court system so they can then, of course, have a transparency. That doesn't happen. We don't know how and on what merit basis. I'll just give one example. If you all remember Justice Karnan of West Bengal High Court, he was a Dalit High Court judge, but he was discriminated against by his own judges. I mean, High Court ka judge matlab, you have achieved, but he was so he leveled an accusation of casteism against his colleagues and harassment by his superiors. Instead of going and apologizing and saying, we'll establish a process, what the Supreme Court, disgraceful Supreme Court did, with all due respect, they called him mentally sick. They called him lunatic. I mean, can you imagine a Dalit judge now you tell me the level of casteism that the person of this much reputation makes, and then what happens? 6 or 7 months later, these 3 judges, they come on national TV, express almost similar grievances, but not in a caste lens, but tell about the dysfunction of judiciary. That was one of the allegations that Justice Karnan had leveled. But these 3 people get a limelight and become the big guys are garnering public sympathy. So why do I bring this is we didn't created a streamlining of process for merit to flourish, for talent to be recognized, especially in judiciary, unless and until you are part of that cabal, a very streamlined network, almost like a Brahmin child is prepared if you're in a judicial line for you to become a judge and then of course ascend to a certain level. That Abhinandan has not happened, yeah. And I mean, of course, here you will have a huge debate if there is no black judge on the Supreme Court bench, if there is no woman on Supreme Court bench, if there is no liberal or conservative on Supreme bench. India mein batao bhaiya, it's a total feudal kind of,
In fact, sir, we had a project going, right, of seeing the gender and caste representation of High Court. How's that project? Is it?
Anusuya is doing it.
She's doing it. I think we should put that up. Actually, we're working on a project on this for a while. Hopefully, we should put that up. Actually, our colleague who was doing this got
Our
COVID.
Excel sheet. We have put all the judges' name. The caste also we have.
Actually, the problem is you can't call up them and ask the caste. We tried to do this in newsrooms. I don't know whether you saw this report that we released last year.
Yeah, good work, guys.
But it's so hard because half our poor young interns and our volunteers and our other team leaders, when they call up, even people who I'm friendly with, I don't want to name them. These are very what they call quote unquote senior journalists. Where are you calling from? News Laundry. I'll tell Abhinandan you asked me my caste. I was like, dude, that's a job. She's supposed to call all you guys कि भाई कितने editors हैं. So anyway,
no. I mean, on that way. I mean, sorry. On the I really hope your colleague brings out that. And for the caste identifier, it's easy, especially if you went to the big courts. It just takes for their bench उनका जो जहाँ से वो निकले हैं. People will always know that.
What happens?
It is easy.
We actually discussed this with Sarthak, who was leading this entire project. He's actually, I think he's studying for his PhD in JNU, and he's doing this data kind of इससी का कोई subject है. But he says the point is that if we just go by surnames, our research will be very easily punctured by तुमने तो ऐसे लिख दिया कि बिना किसी से पूछे. While he says it is fairly easy in 80% of cases, just in some cases you won't be able to tell, but everyone will have a stick to say that your research is flawed because you have just assumed that Mathur hai to ye hai, Sen hai to wo hai. So that is why we have to have one more layer of checking. So anyway, we are figuring out the best way to do that.
No. I will just tell you. I mean, also it can be, simply is that is what exactly your colleague has said is very important because see, Rao jo hai, Rao Brahmin hai, but Rao can also be a non-Brahmin, but that's why I'm saying a second layer of investigation. Of course, surname wise is one, but many people Kumar laga diya hai, Singh laga diya hai. Usme kya hai? But then what happens is that's a second level investigation, and that's why you need some of the scholars who work on caste, especially Dalit scholars, who are sensitive, or even researchers who know how caste functions. They will be able to map it out very, very nicely for us. So for you guys,
maybe I should actually look for that. But anyway, we're starting work on that one. Hopefully next month or the month after. So we will see a more robust report. Anand, you want to come in on this whole Saifuddin Soz Supreme Court institutions pushing back? Is it a scandal like I am claiming, or it's not that big a deal? It's par for the course now.
I don't know the details and the sequence of events. I have not read it myself. But if it is so, I think the court has jumped the gun, and without due diligence, it has. While on the part of the state police, this kind of stratagems and strategies to keep people in house arrest and this. In lower courts, the district police lie many times, but this is a high-profile case of a senior politician being kept under house arrest. So the police should be aware that they would be under scrutiny. As you said, that television cameras went there, so they should have anticipated that the scrutiny would be very soon, and still if they did it, the point that they did it may be wrong, but it is not uncommon in India. Police lies to courts in lower courts many times, but to do it despite the immediate possibility of scrutiny is something unusual. Yes.
Manisha, you want to weigh in on this? And I'm wondering if now the Supreme Court will say, "Ab हमने video देख लिया है, बताइए," or are we at a stage of brazenness where no one gives a fuck?
I think when it comes to Kashmir, there are just no allies left in mainland India. I mean, like you said, even in newspapers that we go by, Indian Express, Hindu and all, it's not the front page news. That means it's just we've just accepted that it's going to be the center's rule there, and it's going to be a rule in the way that they want it to be. So there's very little sympathy even for Kashmiri politicians who've been detained, or for an average Kashmiri. So I don't see this changing anymore. But I'm wondering, like, in this detention, how does it happen? So the police is at your gate and they are not opening the gate. That's it. Like, what if I just walk out, just push my way through, and like, what can they do?
Physically they will stop you, na?
They'll
I mean, he
physically
won't
stop
bash them up, but he will say you can't. He'll just stand in front of the gate, and Mr. Soz is not exactly the great Khali that he can pick up the cough and throw him across.
No, if the Supreme Court wants to see itself, unbiased, they can take note of it, and they can take suo moto note of it, and
I find it highly unlikely if the
Imagine
court
for a
wants to see.
year to be just put in your house like that, yeah? And for what? I mean, he's not even a very active separatist voice, or he's not even a...
he was once supporting the BJP.
Yeah, he's not a politician who's a troublemaker,
I
quote unquote.
definitely think this government has gone at a different... In fact, my recommendation has something to do with that.
And they can do it because they know there's no sympathy, or there's going to be no media scrutiny when it comes to Kashmir.
This is where the
Everything
media...
is...
Now I realize the importance of media. Had this become a shouting thing like the Jan Lokpal movement had become, it would be impossible for governments to ignore. This email is from Goonj. Goonj says that I love News Laundry, but there's a stern, maybe a rude mail regarding Hafta, specifically about Abhinandan giving his views on deaths during COVID. He said so many wrong things in a span of 1 minute that I was forced out of my laziness to writing this email. Goonj, you've gone out to say that basically my point about that Indian Express report I quoted, that if there had been a huge number of underreported deaths on COVID, the overall deaths for this quarter 2019 and this quarter 2020 would have been different, and it wasn't. I don't disagree with what you're saying, that the deaths will rise just because people have got COVID right now doesn't mean that there will be no more deaths. My point was actually very limited. I think you may have misunderstood that I was extrapolating that point that COVID it's not a serious disease. I was merely saying that the claim that there are a huge number of unreported COVID deaths don't seem that huge or dramatic if you just see the overall deaths registered in this. I think that was for a few states, Delhi and 2-3 more.
It was Delhi.
It was just Delhi.
It was just Delhi, 26,000 deaths.
Yeah.
5,000 short of last year.
So you're right, COVID, I mean, one can't be casual about it, but that data doesn't add up. You're saying there are other data points that, the economic cost of the virus is going to cause many deaths. Yes, it's going to, and it might. Then again, the mortality rate of 1%, if 1 crore people get it, then yes, you're right. But I was only talking about the claim of the now. And at least the Delhi data doesn't quite back that claim. That was my limited point. Dheeraj says, Vivek and Amit Verma have started a podcast called Econ Central. Why don't we collaborate? Well, Dheeraj, everybody likes to retain their independence. I can happily ask Amit, but I don't think he'd want to be... If he has his own thing going, why would he want to be a part of News Laundry, really? Much as I like his work, and happy to get him here. But I think independence is important to people. This email is a very long one from Akshat. Akshat has given many points on the Iran-China deal. He's given 4 points. We will probably publish this mail, so all this can happen. On cancel culture, he says, it is we who are perpetuating this phenomenon called cancel culture. For minor incidents, when some people lost their jobs because of statement of social media, it is hardly justified to call it a culture. Then he says in your discussion, no one sought to clarify the difference between cancel culture and trolling. You haven't cancelled anyone till the time you haven't put him or her out of his job or other opportunities. So trolling is not cancel culture. Arpit has nice things to say. He says he's a follower of our work and true journalism. He's been wanting to get the true impact of the locust swarms, because one day they became big news and then they vanished. So he says, are more coming from the border? We have a nationwide monsoon. And the last report you did on it was 29th May. I believe that in the meantime they have visited all of India and returned back to Rajasthan. It is covered in the international press. Arpit, I cannot help you on that. I really don't know where they came, when they went, and it vanished from, headlines, the locust swarms.
Last I know, they came to Lucknow.
Okay.
It was all over Lucknow. But yeah, maybe we can suggest something to read next episode.
And now this email is from Bimal, says, please clarify. NL Hafta, he has heard about naming and shaming companies that sponsor Arnab-like channels. In an ideal universe, the companies will withdraw their sponsorship to the program, and hence someone like Arnab will be forced to self-censor. Isn't this the same as cancel culture? Now you don't have any proven criminal nexus between Arnab and incitement of communal hatred. There is no concrete objective evidence of trust of this in your hand, but you strongly feel deep within yourself that what Arnab is doing is making our society unsafe. The only difference between this and newslaundry line of thought and the woke sensitive youngsters of the West is that they're taking your actions to its logical conclusion. In US, Arnab would never have existed and he'd been forced to censor himself by such actions if an American newslaundry called him out. So how's that they who are getting things done as labeled squishy and hypersensitive, who don't fully get concepts of freedom of expression and liberty, and people like NL team who are failing in getting the same things done are battle-hardened, realistic, mature folks.
So I think it would be cancel culture if we were taking on Arnab for siding with the Prime Minister or being right-wing or being supportive of BJP or being a political propagandist. We're not doing any of that. In fact, it's okay if he was any of that. But the fact is that he uses his shows to spread misinformation and incite communal passions. Palghar was a clear case where he clearly said stuff like हिंदू होना अब हम मारे जाएंगे अगर हम सनातन धर्म को फॉलो करना मतलब हिंदुओं को हत्या हो रही है मतलब he took a crime and made it communal, and that's apparent. So we called him out for erroneous reporting and communal reporting. And and these are global standards. Yeah, I mean these are acknowledged over centuries. What misinformation is, what communal. We're not cancelling him for being a BJP supporter or being a Modi supporter.
I think, Bimal, what I think you might have missed in your analysis is that any culture is not a theorem. It's not 2 + 2 = 4 and I can prove it and that's that, QED. Cultures exist in collective consciousness, in social norms. Like I can have a show today that says, जब तक औरत दहेज नहीं देती अच्छी तरह ट्रीट मत करो, उससे शादी मत करो. आई कैन से काली है तो शादी मत करो. आई कैन से अगर इस कास्ट का है, इस जाति छोटी जाति को छुओ मत, आपके हाथ गंदे हो जाएंगे. आई कैन से कि अपने बर्तन मुसलमानों को ना दो. दैट्स फाइन, आई कैन से इट. एंड आई थिंक इफ समवन सेज ये बंदा क्या बोल रहा है, इसका शो मत देखो, रेनो सेंसोडाइन अगर आप इसका शो स्पॉन्सर कर रहे हो आप बेवकूफ़ हो. आई डोंट थिंक यू वुड बी राइटिंग दिस मेल. Even that is someone's view, and trust me, in India there will be people with the view that I just said. Now in our view, what Arnab does or what Rahul Shiv Shankar does, other than the outright false reporting they do, which is demonstrable, that is like a mathematical theorem, I can prove that is untrue. But even if I were to take that out of the equation, in the culture that I believe we live in and in the phase of evolution of liberal thought and tolerance and mutual respect that we live in, he is still somewhere in the Stone Age. So you're right. I disagree with Manish. You may call it cancel culture, but it is a culture. And the culture that I come from and that I want to live in, Arnab is a dick from hell and a relic. So I will call him out for it. And no, it's not the same thing. Not because it is math, because culturally it is different. That is my view. If anyone wants to win, Anand, Suraj, Raman sir, if you want to have anything to say.
You said it all.
Suraj, anything on cancel culture? Is it the same? Yeah.
You mean cancel culture or Arnab?
No, just this mail that when we call out sponsors who sponsor such hate-filled shows, are we also basically indulgent in cancel culture while I find people hypersensitive if they want me to walk around eggshells around that? Is it the same?
This is a failure of liberal value. What one calls liberal value is very tested to the purity of waters, meaning if you can see the base of this lake, you feel it is trustable. If you can't, then you don't. That's what people do, is try to always use that logic of, even the hypersensitivity and all. I would like to, congratulate you guys for calling out those sponsors who are promoting this kind of hatred, because you see, when the Nazi Holocaust was happening, there were corporations who were supporting and giving intelligence information. Like IBM was one of those.
Right.
And of course, it was taken to court, and so it's actually, in a way, you are doing a favor on them by telling them that these are the wrongs you are doing, and you better be careful, because what is happening in this is you are in lieu of promoting your personal interest, you are actually indirectly contributing to create more instability. And sometimes, so the point is, we are right now in war. Many people don't realize that because many people live in their middle class, cushy internet Wi-Fi houses. They don't realize the amount of war it is going on, especially if you look through the political dissidents and all the attacks and all the kind of cases you're talking about. So when this storm will hopefully, touch wood, uh, be finished or at least, silenced for some time, then we'll be able to hear out what were the wrongs we do. Right now, this cacophonious whataboutery is just become the synonymous to Indian cultural value. And when you are, you're not canceling them. You cancel the people who you think can have a potential of dialogue and they will be repairable. But certain cases, as they say, loose cannons. If you know that this is not gonna, this is a different kind of breed. And even if, for example, the likes of Arnab and the others, if they redeem, even in the redemption, there will be a fake. I mean, the kind of work they are doing, and I'm people are saying, right, sab yaad rakha jayega, and Chaurasias, for example, young daughters are growing up and all. What kind of memories does he want to give to them? Or also the other kind of cultures for other younger generation. And then of course they will be like, that was a different time. Now I would like to come and apologize. No, in Nuremberg trial, if you fucked up, you fucked up. You gotta stand to the crimes that you have committed. And of course, I'm taking it to extreme of comparing it to Nuremberg, but I'm just giving it an analogy that you will not just wash away hands. So for the people like you guys, if you're calling it out and making people aware and also telling the sponsors, I think it's the service of democracy.
Right. Thank you, Suraj. Anand, do you have anything to say on cancel culture? You weren't there last week about am I too harsh in my view on safetyism and expecting people to not be offended by everything?
I have a very brief point to make, and that may be just a semantic quibbling, a kind of semantic kind of nitpicking. But I am uncomfortable with the practice of use of the hate and love dichotomy to represent very provocative media. I would use harsher terms, but not hate and love. Harsher terms because, say, spite, or I said once, spite, malice, but not from what they do. They might be doing horrendous things, but the impact on viewers, I don't see it as hate and love, because hate and love are very private emotions, and if to say that someone is a carrier of it or agent of it gives your criticism of it a moral unassailability. You are putting yourself in a position where nobody would assail you because this is hate and love. But these are private emotions. The impact on viewers, I see television news viewers now, they may be watching horrendous things, but they don't just somehow are filled with hate or love for somebody. What I would club them as carriers of malice, spite. That is all.
Thanks. Now, this mail is from Mithila. Hi, the NL team. I'm sure you've received a lot of mails from people regarding your take on safetyism and your critique and on you. Here I am with a rather bland view on the whole thing. Actually, Mithila, I think you have a very nuanced view. Thank you for it. After reading a few articles on the same, I acknowledge two things. As it is widely known and accepted by many, objectivity is not a way to deal with socio-political issues. Two, political correctness is far from being a sacred virtue. There was an email you guys received in last hafta which criticized Abhinandan and Manisha laughing at some examples that were being cited. All I have to say is that you can't take a person's humorous reaction on anything as their insensitivity towards a certain issue. For all you know, it could have been one of their coping mechanisms. So, good point, yeah. Mithila, you're clearly smarter than I am. Having said that, the examples Abhinandan gave after reading the guy's mail seemed a bit messed up to me. Moreover, Abhinandan, your view on safetyism was sort of quote-unquote basic. I totally agree that it could be it could be taken advantage of, but there are discrepancies almost everywhere. Safetyism isn't in its entirety may not be the way to go for creating a mentally stable and safe environment. However, as Manisha mentioned, there are still a lot of stigma associated with mental health. Therefore, when it comes to judging the legitimacy of an individual's mental health problems, we must first be conditioned in a way that favors being kind and considerate. For that, the rule of thumb would be, in my opinion, give the concerned person benefit of doubt. Now I have a problem with safetyism culture being portrayed as a catch-22 kind of thing. That's because we must first strive to have conducive workplace environments where expressing one's issue must be an easy task, no matter what the subject is. This might be idealistic to a somewhat complex concept, but I can vouch that this remedy works as it works exceptionally well in universities, where the students studying together and the faculty have a brief but accurate knowledge about each other's background, etc. Thanks, Mithila. That was very, very useful. And the last email is from Kinjal, who has said that our video on Anna Nagar was really moving, and I'm sure it wasn't as bad as the Assam floods, but their agony is no less horrendous. He says, Kinjal says, what can we as individuals do apart from donations to help make things better for them? I really don't know, Kinjal. I guess the only people other than provide material help to help people whose jhuggies have been flown by the rivers or by the overflowing nalis, unless you're physically here, which I would not advise because of COVID. In the current circumstances, I don't see one being able to do much other than donating to organizations that are working, to help those. And like I said, during the pandemic, the exodus, just identify an organization that you can vouch for is doing good work and give to them. I often work with Uday Foundation. I have seen firsthand they do really good work. The money is well used. So I did not give to any PM fund or CM fund. I gave to Uday Foundation because they are still continuing to do very good work. Identify an organization in your area that, I repeat, you can firsthand vouch for and give to them. But don't step out yourself. I don't think that's advisable. On that note, I would have loved for a little more on the Bihar floods. But Anand, maybe next hafta you can join us, even if it's for 15 minutes, to give us an update. Will you be back in Patna by next week?
No, not by next week.
Okay, the week after. Anyway,
I am these days dividing my time between Mumbai and Patna.
What are you doing in Bombay?
I'm there for someone's treatment, and I am also teaching here.
Okay, fine. All right. So, on that note, thanks Suraj, thanks Anand, Manisha, Raman. Can we get our recommendations for the week before we say goodbye? And thanks Suraj. I'm sure it's very late in where you are. So thank you for staying up. I appreciate it.
It's 1:16 a.m.
Oh dear God, I'm so sorry.
No, that's like that's the lifestyle. But thank you for having me, y'all. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Abhinandan, Manisha.
And thank you. I promised to read your book, Caste Matters,
Raman,
and hopefully we should have you on talking about your book as a video interview through Zoom. We'll do that soon. But any other recommendations you have for our audience that would enrich their lives?
Also, I forgot. Thank you for Anand was pending. So let me finish that. And so as a reading list, is that what you're asking? I imagine.
Yeah, any recommendation? It could be reading, it could be watching, it could be a show, whatever. Something that you think could benefit our audience.
I think one of the pieces that I recommended is to read Isabel Wilkerson. And there is a series called Caste in America by Philip Martin. It's freely available. It's sponsored by Pulitzer Center, so it must be on their website too. But even if you do a Google search, Caste in America, Philip Martin, you will come across interesting stories. So I could recommend that given the current scenario.
Thanks, Suraj. Good night. Please go to sleep and have a restful sleep, I guess.
Thank you. I'll go later, and I look forward to the reports that are going to come out, especially on judiciary. And I appreciate you guys for all the time and the candor. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Suraj.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Bye. Anand, your recommendation?
Yes, my recommendation is basically a product of coincidence. So I was reading some of the literary works set just after independence, the decade or decades after independence. And this Meera Nair's adaptation of Suitable Boy has come, though it's by look of it, its trailer does not look promising. Seems to be another case of a literary work not being adapted well. So I think it would come on Netflix next month. It is already on BBC One. So my recommendation is, but not that adaptation. My recommendation is Suitable Boy itself, the novel. It's supposed to be one of the longest novels written in English, 1,500 pages, and but not the length. I think it is the most ambitious novels, one of the most ambitious novels written just for the setting of it, the narrative, the cast of characters, and the atmospherics and intertwined stories. Seth is not a kind of a writer who believes in dazzling you with brilliant sentences or contrivances, but just pulls you into a world, and like those 19th century great novelists. So pulling yourself into a world, and that he has, of course, presented only a slice of life of those times, mainly the upper middle class and elite of, say, the whatever we know as Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, as well as Calcutta. Now, these places figure. There is one. I also rate it high because the other much talked about novel of that period, like Rushdie's Midnight Children, I didn't like it because of its contrivances, or to something like Marquez, when many readers feel that when horses fly, flying horses become a story, not the narrative itself. So Seth does not resort to those contrivances. He's a plain storyteller and very ambitious one. My second recommendation is related to that only, and that is in the same period, a very major Hindi writer who edited literary journal Hans, Rajendra Yadav, wrote Pret Bolte Hain, and which was later published as Ye Sara Akash. Now, it is a take of the 1950s middle class life. And this is a kind of life that does not figure in Seth's work. So I think both together would complement in a way that they would complete a picture of middle class scenario, at least in a part of North India. These are the two recommendations.
Thank you. Raman sir, yours?
A mini series called Tokyo Trial on Netflix. This is, I wasn't in fact aware of this, and Irfan Khan has acted in that. He was the India's entry. This was about the international, military tribunal along the line of that Nuremberg trials. So very interesting, in fact, and
Netflix?
very well made. Netflix.
Okay.
And Irfan Khan has acted as Justice Pal, representing India. Nice one.
Chalo. Manisha?
I second Anand's recommendation on Suitable Boy. I think it's one of my favorite novels, which is why I think the series will really disappoint. I can't believe that guy is playing Man, that little kid-looking guy. What's his name? Shahid Kapoor's son.
Oh, is it?
Son, nahi, brother.
Oh, is playing who?
Man, the character who's with the Saida Bai.
Okay.
I mean, he's one of the most fascinating characters. So, definitely read Suitable Boy. There's an interesting piece in Film Companion by Bharadwaj Rangan on the headline is Films May Be on Break, but our obsession with film news clearly isn't. He explores this whole outsider-insider, Kangna, Sushant Raj Kapoor dynamic pretty well, and he also places the burden on the audience. For example, I didn't know that Dhadak, which featured Janhvi Kapoor and Shahid Kapoor's brother. See, I don't even know his name. He's just Shahid Kapoor's brother. Made crazy amount of money, and Son Chidiya made about 1.2 crore. Son Chidiya and 8.71 crore Dhadak. So he says that it's all fine to outrage and all that, but you guys also audience also needs to realize what they're encouraging and what they're, putting out there. And I think it's a very good piece. I'm also reading Kapil Komireddy's Malevolent Republic. It's been talked about quite a bit, but I recently picked it up. It's really interesting, refreshing. It's not the usual sort of stuff that's written about India. And it's mostly post-independent India, so it's interesting. And I watched Hotel Mumbai. This is an old movie about 26/11 attack. If you haven't watched it, you should. It really boiled my blood watching it. I think it really brings to fore the horror of that terror attack.
This was Anupam Kher, Bomani Rani.
It's a fabulous movie. It took a foreigner to make it. Just the way they capture the whole thing of being in that hotel, being trapped, the indiscriminate way in which they went about murdering, slaughtering people with AK-47s, and you had like your cops with with such sad ass weapons going after these young boys. That it also works as a good propaganda film for the right, I guess, because it really makes you angry against Pakistan and makes you really angry at this whole terror nexus. And also how the government then was completely for one day they just didn't know what was happening. They were just completely it took 24 hours for the proper reinforcement to come.
I was shooting Highway on my plate and we were somewhere in Punjab. I think I was in Ludhiana, Jalandhar. And I think Rocky Amur came and said, have you seen the TV? I was like, what? He said, yahan saath dekhte hain. So we went to their room and this was happening. And the first report, so that is a gang war. Because I think Cafe Mondiga was the first one to.
Yeah, Leopold.
And then later.
Yeah, for the longest time, they thought it's a gang war.
And then, of course, then I remember we had to go to sleep. I said, we have a bloody 5 o'clock start in the morning. Please, everyone go to sleep so we can wake up on time for the...
And the most chilling aspect is that here are these men who... How do you fight someone who doesn't care about death? I mean, they were there to die and kill.
Yeah, but I think from this you have to learn lessons. You make sure that you don't turn more people into those who don't care about being pushed to the wall, which is, I think, also what's happening. But my recommendations are two. I think there's a very important piece and I think it won't be read enough purely because Shivam has written it. And Shivam Vij has a lot of haters.
But Shivam Vij has read a lot.
I know,
he
but
provokes aptly for people
a lot of people also just because Shivam hai, because he sometimes writes provocative pieces, sometimes he makes predictions which don't come true or whatever. But he writes a lot of good pieces. There's a very important piece in print. It says Indians will regret their silence over Modi's ever-growing list of political prisoners. And he lists all the people, if you stand up against that, one after the other. We don't know yet. We are recording this early in the morning, but we'll know later in the day. We have some information about some students that may be picked up by the police today. So I think this is an important piece. And one thing that I recommend actually in Awful and Awesome, and I want to, suggest on Hafta, because I want the Hafta audience to watch it. It's a show called Norseman on Netflix. And I think it's hysterically funny. I was cackling like a witch while watching it. But what also struck me was how it has escaped the scrutiny of the woke police. Little Britain was had to apologize. The makers of so many shows have apologized. Here they make jokes on people who are differently abled. They are rape jokes. They are jokes on pillaging. And some have a broader point, which I understand. Humor works like that. If you're making a bigger point, you can use a fulcrum that is, offensive. But some of these jokes they're just for the fuck of it. It is not making a broader point. And how does this show get a free pass? But I think it's a very funny show. And it has some really good contemporary references also. On that note, I'd like to thank Lippy, Aditya, Anil, and everybody else that go into making this show. And like I said, a lot of people work hard to make these shows happen, these podcasts happen. Our reporting also costs money. Do go to newslaundry.com, see what we do, pay to keep news free. And for the duration that Hafta is free, share it with 5 or 6 people you know. And if you can, please don't stop paying just because Hafta is free for this time period. We still need to pay bills and salaries. I'd like to end this Hafta with the song dedication to the central government and its constant utterances down the few years to the Supreme Court.
जिसे है मेरे वफाओं से गिला, रूठे
News Laundry podcasts are available on Stitcher, iTunes, and any other podcast platform.
Please subscribe to News Laundry. Help us keep news independent. To catch all our podcasts on news, pop culture, current affairs, and sport, visit newslaundry.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.